They laughed when America's most feared Mafia King chose an ordinary schoolteacher as his future queen. Days later, the same powerful families watched their empire crumble because they underestimated the one woman they called too plain. But the biggest secret wasn't why Damien chose Grace, it was who she would become. The night Grace Carter entered Blackwood Estate, every powerful family in America's underworld stopped breathing for one quiet second. Not because she wore diamonds. Not because she arrived with bodyguards. Not because she carried a famous last name. She had none of those things. She wore a soft ivory dress that looked beautiful because she was beautiful, not because it was expensive. Her hair was simple, her makeup gentle, her hands folded close to her waist as if she still belonged in a classroom full of children instead of a ballroom full of killers, kings, and women trained to destroy with a smile. The engagement gala was supposed to be another display of Blackwood power and control. Crystal chandeliers burned above marble floors. Champagne glasses touched in perfect rhythm. Senators, billionaires, old mafia wives, and heirs of dangerous families gathered beneath the painted ceiling of the Blackwood estate, waiting to see which elegant woman Damien Blackwood would choose to stand beside him. Every guest expected a queen from their world. Someone cold. Someone polished. Someone born into loyalty, betrayal, war, and empire. Then Damien walked in. He did not need to raise his voice. He never did. The room naturally bent around him. Damien Blackwood, the ruthless king of the Blackwood Empire, moved through the crowd in a black tailored suit, his face unreadable, his silence heavier than any threat. Men who commanded armies lowered their eyes. Women who had ruined families with a whisper adjusted their smiles. Fear followed him like a shadow, quiet and obedient. Grace felt her heart pounding as he stopped at the center of the ballroom. She had no idea why he had brought her here. A month ago, she had been teaching second graders how to spell the word safe. Tonight, she stood beneath 1,000 eyes, feeling danger crawl over her skin. Damien had told her only one thing before they entered. Stay close and no matter what happens, do not run. Then he turned toward the guests and made the announcement that shattered the room. Grace Carter was the woman he intended to marry. For a moment there was no sound. No music. No glass. No breath. Even the violins seemed afraid to continue. Grace felt the silence wrap around her throat, but she did not look down. She looked at Damien, searching his face for an explanation, for warmth, for warning. He gave her nothing. Only that dark, controlled stare that made people wonder whether he was calm or already planning punishment. Victoria Blackwood stepped forward. Damien's mother was dressed in silver, cold as moonlight and twice as cruel. Her diamonds flashed at her throat when she looked Grace up and down, taking in the plain dress, the nervous hands, the absence of family jewels, the softness that did not belong in their world. Then Victoria smiled. Too plain for our family. The words did not sound loud, yet they traveled everywhere. Across the marble. Up the staircase. Into every corner where powerful men listened and elite women secretly laughed behind crystal glasses. A few lowered their lashes to hide their amusement. Others exchanged quick whispers, already turning Grace into a joke before she had even become a bride. Grace stood still. Inside, humiliation burned. Her chest tightened. Her hands wanted to shake. But she had spent years protecting children who came to school hungry, frightened, and silent. She knew how to stand steady when a room wanted her small. She knew how to breathe when her heart was pounding. She was not glamorous. She was not trained for this empire. But she was not weak. Damien watched everything. He watched his mother's smile. He watched the women laughing. He watched the men pretending not to enjoy the insult. He watched Grace most of all, studying the way she absorbed the cruelty without breaking. No one could read his expression, and that made the fear spread faster. Because Damien Blackwood never reacted without purpose. Then slowly he set down his untouched glass. The entire ballroom froze again. Grace felt the air change before he moved. Damien stepped away from the guests, away from his mother, away from the old families waiting to see whether he would abandon the plain teacher they had already rejected. He walked directly toward Grace. And every whisper died before he reached her. The whispers continued long after Damien Blackwood walked toward Grace, but she barely heard them. Years of living an ordinary life had taught her that people often judged what they did not understand. She had never dreamed of standing beneath crystal chandeliers or becoming part of an empire feared across America. Before this impossible night, Grace Carter's world had been wonderfully simple. She lived in a modest brick house on the quiet edge of the city with her 16-year-old brother Ethan. The only family she had left after a tragic car accident had taken both of their parents 5 years earlier. Since that day she had quietly become both sister and guardian, balancing lesson plans with grocery lists, helping Ethan finish homework before preparing tomorrow's classroom activities. Every paycheck disappeared into school supplies, utility bills, and college savings. Luxury had never interested her because seeing her brother smile after a difficult day was worth more than any diamond. Each morning she welcomed children into her elementary classroom with the same gentle smile, believing every frightened child deserved to feel safe before they could ever learn. Parents trusted her because she listened. Students adored her because she remembered every birthday and every small victory. Grace measured success through kindness rather than wealth. She never followed stories about powerful businessmen or mysterious crime families. Names that filled newspaper headlines meant nothing to her. The dangerous world surrounding Damian Blackwood existed like another universe beyond the peaceful walls of her school. Months before the engagement gala, fate had quietly crossed their paths without Grace realizing it. It happened on a rainy afternoon outside a crowded public library. Parents hurried across the sidewalks while cars crawled through heavy traffic. Suddenly, a terrified little boy burst from an alley, his tiny face pale with fear, desperately searching for somewhere to hide. Adults stepped away, unwilling to become involved in whatever danger followed behind him. Grace never hesitated. She knelt beside the trembling child, wrapped her coat around his shoulders, and gently whispered that everything would be all right. She guided him behind a nearby cafe terrace, offering warm cocoa and calm reassurance while encouraging him to slow his breath. She believed the frightened child had simply become separated from his family. What Grace never knew was that the boy belonged to one of Damian's closest allies and had narrowly escaped a carefully planned kidnapping attempt. Within minutes, discreet security teams secured the surrounding streets without creating panic. Standing several yards away beneath the shelter of a black umbrella, Damian observed everything in complete silence. His men expected immediate orders. Instead, he remained perfectly still, watching the young teacher comfort a child she had never met without expecting recognition, gratitude, or reward. When the boy's guardians finally arrived, Grace simply smiled, reminded the child to stay close to adults, and quietly returned to carrying her grocery bags home. She never looked back. She never noticed the man whose sharp eyes followed her until she disappeared into the evening crowd. That single act remained in Damian's thoughts long after countless glamorous women had faded from memory. Beauty surrounded him every day. Genuine compassion did not. For the first time in years, the ruthless king admired someone not because she possessed power, but because she naturally chose to protect another human being. Back inside Blackwood Estate, Victoria Blackwood had no intention of allowing such a woman to become part of her family. With subtle gestures hidden behind elegant smiles, she instructed the household servants to remind Grace that she did not belong. A chair was intentionally removed before Grace could sit. Her place card mysteriously disappeared. Her tea was served cold while every other guest received fresh cups. Small humiliations unfolded one after another, each designed to provoke embarrassment without creating open conflict. Around the ballroom, elite women exchanged satisfied whispers, waiting for the schoolteacher to finally lose her composure. Grace disappointed every one of them. When an elderly housekeeper accidentally dropped an antique serving tray, several guests stepped away to protect expensive shoes. Grace immediately knelt beside the frightened woman, helping gather the scattered silverware before anyone could blame her. She quietly assured the trembling employee that accidents happened and gently steadied her shaking hands. The elderly woman looked ready to cry, yet Grace smiled warmly as though comforting one of her own students. She asked whether the woman needed water before returning the polished tray without seeking attention. From across the ballroom, Damian witnessed every second. He saw the servants lower their eyes with gratitude. He noticed the elderly housekeeper's relieved smile. He observed Grace choosing compassion over pride despite the insults surrounding her. Each silent decision deepened the respect already growing inside him. She had not entered his world searching for wealth or status. She carried loyalty in her heart without realizing its value. She offered safety instead of judgment. More importantly, she behaved as though kindness was simply who she was. Damian slowly stepped forward, extended his hand toward Grace before the silent ballroom, and calmly invited her to dance as every member of the elite watched in stunned disbelief. For one suspended moment, Grace simply stared at Damian's outstretched hand. The elegant ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the endless sea of powerful faces, and the suffocating silence all seemed to disappear behind the thunder of her own heart pounding. She had spent her entire life avoiding attention, believing that ordinary people belonged in ordinary places. This magnificent estate, filled with America's most influential mafia families, was never meant for someone like her. She looked down at her simple dress, then toward the countless women draped in designer gowns and priceless jewels. Every instinct told her to step back. She quietly whispered that she did not belong here. Damien's expression never changed. Without saying a single unnecessary word, he moved one step close until only a breath separated them. His eyes remained calm, steady, and impossible to question. Then, with deliberate patience, he gently took her hand into his own. His grip carried neither force nor hesitation. It carried certainty. The silent message reached Grace before any words ever could. She was safe beside him. No one in that room had the authority to decide where she belonged except the man standing before her. Together they walked toward the center of the ballroom. Every polished marble tile echoed beneath their footsteps. Conversations died completely. Influential mafia leaders watched with unreadable faces while their wives struggled to hide their disbelief. Young heirs who had spent years hoping to strengthen alliances through marriage stared in stunned silence. Grace could almost feel thousands of eyes measuring her every movement. Fear quietly brushed against her heart, but Damien never released her hand. His calm presence steadied every uncertain breath she took. Across the ballroom, Victoria Blackwood could no longer conceal her anger. Her carefully maintained elegance cracked beneath the weight of humiliation. For years she had arranged introductions between Damien and daughters from the wealthiest syndicates in America. Heiresses educated in European academies, women raised to understand political influence, financial strategy, and the ruthless customs of powerful families had all waited for Damien's attention. Tonight he ignored every one of them without the slightest glance. Instead, he crossed an entire ballroom for an elementary school teacher whose greatest treasure was compassion rather than wealth. The orchestra slowly resumed its melody. Damien placed one hand gently around Grace's waist while respectfully holding her other hand. His movements were confident but careful, ensuring she never felt overwhelmed. Grace hesitated during the first few steps, embarrassed by the attention surrounding them, but Damien quietly adjusted his pace until she naturally matched his rhythm. There was no pressure. No performance. Only an unspoken promise that she would never face the room alone again. As they moved across the polished floor, people expected Damien to maintain emotional distance, the cold discipline for which the king of the Blackwood Empire was famous. Instead, something far more unsettling happened. His attention never wandered from Grace. He listened whenever she spoke softly. He subtly guided her away whenever curious guests drifted too close. Every protective gesture declared ownership without arrogance. He never spoke the word aloud, yet everyone present understood the silent truth. She was already his queen. The realization spread through the ballroom faster than any announcement could have. Quiet whispers passed from one influential family to another. Business alliances were mentally recalculated. Political advantages shifted. Loyal advisors exchanged cautious glances. If Damien truly valued Grace above status, then she had instantly become the most precious person inside the Blackwood Empire. Not everyone welcomed that realization. Several rival family representatives observed the dance with careful smiles hiding dangerous calculations. They were seasoned strategists who understood that every powerful king possessed one vulnerability. For years Damien appeared untouchable because he cared for nothing beyond maintaining absolute control over his empire. Tonight everything changed. Grace had become visible. More importantly, she had become emotionally important. Hidden enemies silently recognized an opportunity they had never possessed before. Grace, unaware of the deeper political currents surrounding her, slowly began noticing small details that unsettled her. Groups of guests lowered their voices whenever she approached. Certain strangers watched her far longer than courtesy required before turning away. One elegantly dressed woman slipped out onto a balcony after exchanging a discreet signal with a gray-haired businessman standing near the entrance. Another guest quietly folded a handwritten note before passing it to a servant who disappeared without explanation. None of it seemed accidental. A quiet uneasiness settled inside Grace. She looked toward Damien, wondering whether he had noticed the unusual whispers moving through the ballroom like invisible waves. His expression remained composed, but his eyes had sharpened ever so slightly. He was watching everything. Far beyond the glittering windows of Blackwood Estate, hidden in the darkness overlooking the celebration, another pair of eyes settled behind a precision scope. The crosshairs moved slowly through the crowded ballroom before stopping directly over Grace Carter. Someone had already chosen the king's queen as the perfect target. The elegant melody still floated through the ballroom when Damien's expression changed by the smallest fraction. To everyone else, the evening appeared untouched by tension, but years of surviving hidden threats had sharpened instincts few could understand. While Grace continued following the gentle rhythm of the dance, Damien noticed a brief reflection glimmer across one of the distant ballroom windows. It lasted less than a heartbeat, yet it was enough. Without breaking the music or creating panic, he calmly stepped closer, turned Grace in a graceful movement, and positioned his own body between her and the towering glass. The guests applauded what they believed was another beautiful step in the dance, never realizing the king had quietly shielded his queen from unseen danger. Within seconds, discreet members of Blackwood security moved into action without disturbing the celebration. Several bodyguards casually drifted toward the windows while others silently secured every entrance. Their communication happened through tiny gestures invisible to ordinary eyes. Moments later, one security officer approached Damien and gave a nearly imperceptible nod before disappearing again. The celebration continued, but the atmosphere beneath its elegance had completely changed. Hidden beyond the estate grounds, investigators discovered clear evidence that someone had carefully planned an assassination attempt. The attack had failed before it could unfold, yet the discovery sent fear spreading through Damien's inner circle. An emergency security review began immediately inside a private conference room while guests remained distracted by music and conversation. Damien's most loyal advisors examined every visitor list, surveillance report and communication record connected to the gala. The conclusion unsettled every person present. Information about the engagement celebration had never been released publicly. Only trusted members of the Blackwood family knew the complete details. Whoever had arranged the attack possessed knowledge that could only have come from inside the family itself. The realization struck harder than any external threat. An enemy outside the empire was expected. Betrayal within its own walls was something entirely different. While Damien's security teams quietly searched for answers, Victoria Blackwood excused herself from the ballroom under the appearance of fatigue. Instead of retiring to her private suite, she entered an isolated drawing room where several influential mafia elders were already waiting. The room carried decades of tradition, and every person seated there represented an old alliance built through carefully arranged marriages rather than affection. Victoria spoke with controlled confidence, insisting that Damien's engagement threatened the future of the Blackwood Empire. According to her, Grace possessed kindness but lacked political influence. She argued that the king should marry the daughter of another powerful syndicate to strengthen alliances before the growing tensions between rival families developed into open war. The elders exchanged thoughtful glances, recognizing both the logic and the hidden ambition behind Victoria's proposal. Unaware of that secret meeting, Grace stood alone on a quiet balcony, struggling to steady her breath. The events of the evening replayed endlessly inside her mind. Everywhere she looked, armed security quietly repositioned themselves. Servants whispered nervously in distant hallways. The warmth she had briefly felt during the dance had been replaced by overwhelming guilt. She convinced herself that everything happening inside the estate existed because of her. Before she entered Damien's life, he had ruled his world with perfect control. Now hidden enemies were watching, plotting, and creating danger simply because she stood beside him. The painful thought settled deeply inside her heart. Perhaps leaving would protect everyone. When Damien found her, she softly explained that she intended to disappear before sunrise. She believed his empire would become safe again if she quietly returned to her classroom and ordinary life. Damien listened without interruption before taking one calm step closer. His voice remained low, steady, and impossible to misunderstand. He told her that leaving would not erase the threat because the people hunting her had already made their decision. From this moment forward, she belonged under his protection. Not because she was weak but because she mattered. The single word remained unspoken, yet Grace felt it more clearly than ever. What? For the first time, Grace truly understood the invisible weight Damien carried every day. His world was built upon loyalty constantly tested by hidden betrayal. Smiles concealed ambition. Friendly conversations disguised dangerous intentions. Every invitation, every alliance, every celebration demanded careful judgment. The luxurious estate no longer appeared glamorous. It resembled a carefully guarded fortress where trust had become the rarest treasure of all. Meanwhile, Damien's most loyal bodyguards quietly uncovered disturbing financial records, coded messages, and unexplained meetings connecting respected members of the Blackwood household to unknown intermediaries. Every new discovery pointed toward a carefully hidden conspiracy growing inside the family itself. Someone had been feeding information to powerful rivals for months. Later that night, while searching for a quiet place to clear her thoughts, Grace accidentally paused outside an open library door. Inside, Victoria's unmistakable voice echoed through the dim room with chilling certainty. "I will destroy Grace Carter before this wedding ever takes place." Grace stood frozen outside the doorway as every hopeful thought inside her quietly shattered. Grace barely slept after overhearing Victoria's promise. Every whisper echoed through her thoughts until sunrise painted the windows of Blackwood Estate with pale golden light. She understood one undeniable truth. Running away would not end the danger. It would only reward those who believed kindness belonged to the weak. For years she had quietly endured hardship while raising her younger brother, solving problems through patience instead of anger, and protecting frightened children who depended upon her calm. Those experiences had never made headlines, yet they had shaped something far stronger than she realized. Standing before her bedroom mirror that morning, Grace finally accepted the reality she had avoided since entering Damien's world. She was not a victim. If she wished to stand beside the king, she could no longer live like someone waiting to be rescued. That same afternoon, unexpected trouble erupted inside one of the Blackwood shipping terminals. Two respected mafia captains, Marcus Hale and Vincent Romano, found themselves locked in a bitter dispute over responsibility for a delayed international shipment carrying valuable medical equipment. Neither man wished to surrender authority because both believed their reputation inside the empire depended upon winning the argument. Their followers gathered behind them, exchanging tense glances as frustration spread through the warehouse. Every loyal soldier expected Damien to settle the matter personally, but the king was attending a confidential strategy meeting across the city. Grace happened to arrive with documents Damien had asked her to deliver. The moment she entered the warehouse, conversations abruptly stopped. Some men looked away with polite respect while others questioned why an elementary school teacher had appeared in the middle of an internal dispute. Marcus and Vincent immediately attempted to hide their disagreement, but Grace sensed the strain hanging in the air. Instead of walking away, she quietly asked one simple question. She invited each captain to explain the problem without interruption. Her calm voice surprised everyone. Neither accusation nor judgment entered her words. She simply listened. One captain believed his team had been unfairly blamed for delays created by severe weather. The other insisted damaged communication had caused expensive confusion between different ports. As each man spoke, Grace noticed something the others had ignored. Neither captain actually wanted conflict. Both feared losing Damien's trust more than losing the argument itself. Their pride had disguised the real issue. Grace gently suggested a different perspective. Rather than asking who had made the mistake, she asked how the empire could become stronger by combining both teams' experience. She proposed a shared logistics committee where future problems would be solved together before reaching Damien's desk. The solution protected both captains from unnecessary embarrassment while strengthening the organization itself. Silence settled across the warehouse. Then Marcus slowly nodded. Vincent followed only moments later. For the first time that day, the tension disappeared. Veteran soldiers exchanged astonished glances as handshakes replaced suspicion. No threats had been spoken. No displays of power had been necessary. Grace had accomplished within minutes what experienced commanders had failed to achieve for hours. She had earned cooperation through understanding instead of fear. News traveled quickly through the Blackwood Empire. By evening, Damien had already received detailed reports describing exactly how Grace had peacefully resolved the conflict. He listened carefully while his advisors explained every word she had spoken. A faint smile appeared across his normally unreadable face. He had always admired her compassion, but today he discovered something even more valuable. Grace possessed extraordinary judgment. She understood people before she understood politics, and because of that, she inspired genuine loyalty. Damien quietly decided that future family discussions would include her opinion. If she was destined to become his queen, she deserved to help shape the future of the empire beside him rather than merely observe it. Meanwhile, Victoria watched her influence quietly fade. Servants who once obeyed her every instruction now naturally sought Grace whenever disagreements arose. Household staff smiled more freely. Guards greeted Grace with sincere respect instead of cautious politeness. Even senior advisors began requesting her presence during charitable planning meetings because they trusted her balanced thinking. Victoria recognized the painful truth unfolding before her eyes. Grace had gained something money could never purchase. People followed her willingly. Grace herself remained unchanged. She still thanked every servant by name. She still paused to help elderly staff carry heavy records through the library corridors. She still remembered birthdays, encouraged frightened employees, and quietly reminded everyone that respect created stronger loyalty than intimidation ever could. Without realizing it, she transformed the atmosphere surrounding Blackwood Estate. She became powerful not because others feared her, but because they believed she would always protect those who depended upon her. Late that evening, Damien returned from an important council meeting expecting to find Grace waiting in the estate garden where they often spoke in private. Instead, the stone pathway stood empty. A single white rose rested upon the bench beside an envelope carrying the unmistakable crest of a rival syndicate. As Damien opened the message, every trace of warmth vanished from his expression. Grace Carter was gone. The moment Damien finished reading the letter bearing the rival syndicate seal, the atmosphere inside Blackwood Estate transformed. The celebration that had begun as an engagement gala ended as the opening chapter of a silent war. Every corridor filled with disciplined urgency. Trusted commanders received encrypted instructions while armored vehicles quietly departed in every direction before dawn. Damien stood motionless in the center of his strategy room, his eyes fixed on the single white rose left behind for Grace. The message attached to it contained no ransom demand, no negotiation, and no deadline. It carried only one sentence. The king has finally discovered what can be taken from him. Those words confirmed everything Damien feared. This was never about money. It was about breaking the Blackwood Empire from within. Within hours, Damien launched the largest citywide search the Empire had ever witnessed. Every safe house, private airfield, abandoned warehouse, luxury hotel, and hidden estate connected to rival organizations came under quiet surveillance. Loyal allies closed highways leading out of the city. Shipping terminals reported every unusual container movement. Financial networks monitored suspicious transactions. Informants emerged from places where even the police had no influence. The Blackwood symbol appeared across the city like an invisible storm gathering strength. Fear quietly spread through criminal circles because everyone understood one truth. The king was no longer protecting his empire alone. He was searching for the woman who had become his queen. The consequences reached far beyond one kidnapping. Neutral families that had balanced between rival alliances suddenly found themselves forced to choose sides. Long-standing agreements collapsed overnight as ambitious leaders calculated where future power would rest. Some pledged renewed loyalty to Damien, believing his determination made him stronger than ever. Others secretly aligned with the rival syndicate, hoping the growing conflict would weaken both sides enough to create opportunities of their own. Boardrooms replaced ballrooms as influential figures held emergency meetings behind closed doors. Across the city, quiet conversations turned into preparations for open confrontation. Everyone realized the old balance of control had ended. Far away inside an isolated countryside estate, Grace remained under constant watch. Her surroundings were unfamiliar, yet she refused to surrender to panic. Every slow breath reminded her that fear clouded judgment, while calm revealed opportunity. The people guarding her expected tears, anger, or desperate pleas. Instead, they encountered quiet patience. She observed everything without appearing curious. She memorized hallway layouts, counted security rotations, noticed delivery schedules, and listened carefully whenever guards spoke carelessly near open doors. They underestimated her because she remained polite. They mistook kindness for helplessness. Grace allowed them to believe exactly that. Over several days, she quietly assembled a remarkable picture of the rival syndicate's internal struggles. She learned that several senior advisors disagreed with their leader's decision to provoke Damien into full conflict. Financial resources were becoming strained. Certain allies questioned whether the kidnapping had gone too far. Through simple conversations with household employees and careful observation during meal deliveries, Grace discovered names, meeting times, and hidden disagreements that could become invaluable to the Blackwood Empire. She wrote nothing down. Every detail remained safely inside her memory. Meanwhile, Damien received repeated offers disguised as compromise. Neutral intermediaries suggested political marriages, territorial concessions, and financial settlements in exchange for ending the crisis peacefully. Some advisors argued that preserving the empire required difficult sacrifices. Damien rejected every proposal without hesitation. His answer never changed. Grace was not a bargaining tool. She was under his protection, and no amount of political advantage would persuade him to abandon her. Those closest to him recognized something extraordinary. The ruthless king who had once viewed emotions as dangerous weaknesses now treated loyalty as his greatest strength. Victoria watched these developments with growing disbelief. She had believed Grace's disappearance would convince Damien that ordinary women had no place inside their dangerous world. Instead, the opposite occurred. Noble families admired Damien's unwavering devotion. Loyal soldiers served him with even greater commitment because they saw a leader who refused to sacrifice those under his care. Grace had unknowingly united the empire rather than dividing it. Victoria finally understood that every attempt to separate them had only strengthened Damien's resolve. Days later, hidden intelligence finally revealed the location of the enemy stronghold. Before sunrise, Damien personally led his trusted commanders toward the heavily guarded compound where Grace was believed to be held. Every member of the Blackwood force advanced with disciplined precision, convinced the search was finally ending. Damien entered the estate expecting to see Grace waiting behind the locked doors described by his informants. Instead, the room stood empty. Only an abandoned chair, an open window, and a single folded note remained, proving that Grace had disappeared once again only moments before Damien arrived. The empty room should have shattered Damien's confidence, yet something inside it immediately caught his attention. The folded note left behind contained only 3 carefully written words. "Trust the teacher." Damien read the message twice before quietly folding it into his pocket. A faint smile appeared across his otherwise unreadable face. Everyone around him believed Grace had been taken again. Damien reached a different conclusion. She had escaped. She was alive. More importantly, she was already thinking several steps ahead. Only a few miles away, Grace moved carefully through an abandoned riverside warehouse district where the rival syndicate had secretly relocated several innocent civilians to prevent unwanted attention. During her captivity, she had patiently observed forgotten maintenance corridors, and used service tunnels and overlooked emergency exits. Rather than forcing her way through impossible barriers, she had waited until changing security shifts created a narrow opportunity. She understood that intelligence often opened doors that strength could never move. Remaining calm, she quietly guided herself through unfamiliar passages until she reached a locked storage section where frightened voices echoed from inside. Opening the heavy door, Grace discovered several innocent hostages, including elderly employees, delivery drivers, and 2 young office assistants who had unknowingly witnessed confidential meetings. They had not been harmed, but fear filled every face. Some believed no one would ever find them. Grace immediately steadied the room with the same reassuring voice she once used inside her elementary classroom. She reminded everyone to breathe slowly, remain together, and trust one another. Instead of allowing panic to spread, she organized them into small groups, helping older captives walk while encouraging the younger ones to support each other. She transformed confusion into quiet hope. Protecting others came naturally to her because compassion had always been her greatest strength. Using everything she had memorized during captivity, Grace carefully led the group through hidden utility corridors until they emerged safely beyond the guarded perimeter. Along the way, she avoided unnecessary risks, choosing patience over haste whenever uncertainty appeared. Several Blackwood reconnaissance teams searching nearby soon discovered the exhausted group. Their commander expected terrified confusion. Instead, he found Grace calmly checking that every hostage had safely crossed the final security gate before thinking about herself. The experienced captain lowered his head with genuine respect. News of her actions spread through Blackwood communication channels almost instantly. When senior Mafia captains gathered later that afternoon, conversation centered on only one subject. They no longer spoke about Grace as the ordinary schoolteacher Damien intended to marry. They spoke about the woman who had calmly protected innocent lives while escaping captivity without creating chaos. Veteran commanders who had earned respect through decades of strategy openly acknowledged her remarkable judgment. Some quietly admitted they would gladly follow her decisions during future crises because she inspired loyalty instead of obedience. They finally understood why Damien had chosen her long before anyone else recognized her worth. As the rescued civilians were escorted toward the secured convoy, Grace suddenly noticed familiar black vehicles approaching across the open road. Her heart pounding, she instinctively stopped walking. The lead vehicle came to a gentle halt before her, and Damien stepped out without speaking. For several silent seconds, neither moved. Every fear, every sleepless night, every unanswered question disappeared within that single moment. Grace realized she no longer needed to wonder whether she belonged beside him. Damien crossed the remaining distance and quietly took both of her hands, his steady eyes never leaving hers. There was relief, gratitude, admiration, and unwavering certainty inside his gaze. Without needing words, he reminded her once again that she had always been safe with him. From a nearby observation platform, Victoria witnessed the reunion in complete silence. She expected the rescued civilians to celebrate Damien alone. Instead, one by one Blackwood soldiers, advisors and respected captains naturally turned toward Grace first. They thanked her for protecting innocent people. They praised her wisdom. They welcomed her home without hesitation. In that unforgettable moment, Victoria finally accepted the painful truth she had spent months denying. The empire had already chosen its future queen. Not because of bloodline. Not because of wealth. Not because of status. Grace had earned every heart through character. Grace felt that truth settled deeply within her own heart as well. The frightened teacher who once believed she was too ordinary for Damien's world no longer existed. She had discovered strength hidden inside kindness, courage hidden inside compassion, and confidence hidden beneath humility. She became powerful because she never abandoned who she truly was. As Damien gently intertwined his fingers with hers, he looked toward the gathering of powerful families and influential captains before making one calm announcement that sent stunned silence across everyone present. The wedding will not unite two families. It will unite every loyal soul under one empire. Damien's announcement did not echo like a threat. It settled over the gathered families like a final law. The Blackwood Empire would no longer be ruled by bloodline alone, nor would its future be decided by prestige, old alliances, or beautiful names written on ancient family records. For years, every person inside that world had believed power came from fear, money, and perfect control. But standing beside Grace, with her hand held firmly in his, Damien showed them something far more dangerous than cruelty. He showed them certainty. Victoria stepped forward, her face pale with disbelief, but Damien did not allow her to speak. In front of every mafia captain, every elder, every rival who had come to witness weakness, he publicly removed her from family leadership. His voice remained calm, but the room felt its weight. He declared that anyone who placed pride above loyalty had no right to guide the empire. Anyone who endangered the innocent to protect status had already betrayed the Blackwood name. Victoria's diamonds trembled at her throat as she realized her own son was not punishing her out of anger. He was protecting the future from her ambition. Then Damien turned to Grace. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Grace felt her heart pounding, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming truth of the moment. She remembered entering this estate as the woman no one wanted to accept. She remembered the cold smiles, the cruel whispers, the way they had measured her simple dress and decided she was nothing. But she also remembered every frightened person she had helped, every hostage she had led to safety, every captain who had learned that compassion could command deeper loyalty than intimidation ever could. Damien gently lifted her hand before the entire room. He declared Grace Carter the Queen of the Blackwood Empire. One by one the Mafia captains stepped forward. Marcus Hale was first, lowering his head with absolute respect. Vincent Romano followed. Then commanders, advisors, bodyguards, and old soldiers who had survived decades of war pledged their loyalty to her. Not because Damien ordered them. Not because she carried his name. But because she had earned it. Grace stood close to Damien, no longer shrinking from the eyes upon her. She was not a victim. She became powerful, and every person in that room finally understood why. Victoria watched in silence as kindness achieved what manipulation never could. She had spent her life believing a queen had to be born into wealth, trained in control, and polished until nothing soft remained. Grace proved the opposite. Her softness had never been weakness. It had been strength with a human heart. She had protected without demanding repayment. She had led without humiliating others. She had become the safest place inside the most dangerous empire in America. Damien looked across the room and reminded every family that true strength did not come from appearance, inheritance, or status. It came from character. It came from the courage to protect people when no one was watching. It came from choosing loyalty over ego and compassion over cruelty. He made it clear that anyone who could not honor Grace could not stand beside Blackwood again. From that day forward, the empire changed. Grace did not soften its discipline, but she gave it purpose. Families once divided by suspicion began working together under her quiet guidance. Servants who once moved through the estate in fear now walked with dignity. Captains brought conflicts to her before they became battles. Children of loyal families found shelter inside Blackwood schools and clinics funded in her name. Damien remained the king, feared by enemies and respected by allies, but Grace became the heart of the empire. And in every important moment of his life, Damien chose her first. When councils argued, he looked to Grace. When danger approached, he stood close. When enemies whispered that love had made him weak, he simply held her hand and proved that protecting what was mine had made him stronger. The powerful guests never forgot the words once used to humiliate her. Too plain for our family. In the end, the woman they called too plain became the most respected queen the Blackwood Empire had ever known, proving that loyalty, courage and compassion were stronger than beauty, status, or bloodline. Before you go, here's something to think about. Stories like this survive because people who love powerful endings choose to support them. If Grace and Damien's journey kept you hooked, take a second to like the video, share it with someone who loves Mafia Romance, and subscribe so you don't miss our next cinematic story. The next king, the next queen, and the next unforgettable empire might be waiting in the very next video. And now, one final question I genuinely want you to answer in the comments. When Damien chose Grace over wealth, beauty, and bloodline, was that the moment he became a true king, or do you think Grace became the real strength behind the Blackwood Empire? There isn't a right or wrong answer, and I'm really curious to see which side you choose.